Hi everyone. This video is going to complete a lab of Windows Snort installation. And the main objectives of the lab is for us to understand the structure, directory structures of the Windows Snort. And we're going to go through the installation and also install many different supporting application packages to manage to help troubleshoot and maintain our snort sensor. And also those applications are a great tool for troubleshooting and deploying other Cisco devices and do a network maintenance work. And of course, we're going to compare the snort in a different platform, Windows and Linux. We are not going to do the UDP flood attack like we did last time, but we are going to show you how to just copy an ICMP info rule, one rule file to the snort rule folder to replace the whole file. And also we have a new local rule, and that file I already uploaded to the canvas. It actually activated all the ICMP, general ICMP and general TCP, general UDP. It's a quick, easy way of testing your sensor deployment. Okay, so this is the topology that we're going to use. We're going to open up Internet Firewall so that our sensor Windows 10 can go to the internet and download whatever file is needed for the exercise. And pfSense is the firewall to connect the inside, which including Meta-E and the Windows 10, connect them to the outside internet. Meta-E is 10.0.1.2. The sensor of the Windows 10 is 10.0.1.2.10. We're also going to use Windows 2019. It has two interfaces. We're going to disable outside and then just connect the inside, enable the inside, and make sure that the IP is set at 10.0.1.219. And we're going to add a new box, Kali, at 10.10.10.44, which is on the outside 10.10.10 network. So therefore, when Kali wanted to ping or access the Windows 10 sensor, it's going to access the Windows 10 sensor's translated address at 10.10.10.210. Okay. We're going to go to Horizon Client and go to the Windows 10. Of course, we're going to power on first the Internet Firewall and pfSense Net and also Kali 2. I moved Windows 2019 from the outside here, and I just drag it. I can move it down below, so it becomes an inside. You moving it down doesn't change any settings on the box itself. So it still has two interfaces, one connected to outside, one connected to inside. It's that it is just that we are going to disable the outside and just use the inside interface. So that's why I bring it down. So for us to have a better visual effect of the topology. Okay, the inside will test the inside on the same network, and then the outside Kali will go through the firewall's outside interface and then access the inside. All right. Right-click on Windows 10 and look at the snapshot. Look at the snapshot manager. We are here, and if you click on this one, you will see that, oh, this one already have, I fixed some IPv6 problems, and the file download for the Snort is already installed, and all the batch has already been created. I took a snapshot there after I install it, mainly because later on, after we complete this exercise, we are going to roll back to here. So when we do packet crafting to do a more advanced security assessment of the Windows Snort. We don't have to reinstall the whole Snort package. We can just go ahead and use the image that's already been installed and tested. But today we are going to roll back to here. So you're going to double click here and it will ask you, do you want to restore it? Yes. And then if you go back to double check that before we start, go to the manager again. Now you are here. So we are going to install everything and let it go back here. Of course, it's not going to show you image is right here. It's going to show you complete in here with a Snort install. And then because this is the VMware inside VM, so you don't have to roll it back. If you deploy it at your own environment using your host PC at home, then you have to roll it back here so it can continue on this way. Otherwise, you will have two branches of the image going. For the school network, you don't have to, because after you're done, you log off for more than an hour, it's going to be rolled back to the original stage. So let's open it, power on. Meanwhile, let's take a look at Windows 2019, do an IP config. Then we just want to make sure that IP is set to 219 and it's the inside. We can, of course, check that by right click here and go to the window and look at the change adapter options and make sure your outside is disabled. If not, right click and click on disable. Make sure inside is enabled and look at the property of the inside. You can see the IPv4 information. If it's not 219, change it to 219. Make sure your default gateway is 10.0.1.1. Google 8888 is your DNS, so it can access the internet. Not that we need to do it in this exercise, but it's just a good practice to do that. All right, so that is done. Get it out. And Callie, just make sure that we started it, and the user is root. Password is change me. And the meta E. Now we can take a look at our meta E. If you see the line above the login says login with msfadmin/msfadmin. That means username is msfadmin and the password is msfadmin. So we're going to log in msfadmin. Okay, good. This is good enough for us. Now you have to hold down Control Alternate key to get out of this screen to get your mouse cursor back. Now let's go to Windows 10, which is our main focus today. Right click, and then you're going to look at this time, send a Control Alternate Delete. Click here, change me. Now we need to go to Google Chrome. Now let's open the full screen and log into your portal. Okay, so we are going to go to the course, and we're going to look at the window Snort here, the handout window Snort. I click that to download it, and then there's a folder, the supporting files for the Windows Snort. If we click that, you can read from here, or you can download a copy and print it out, or just open a read-only copy of the document to follow along with the lab. I'm going to go to the supporting file folder, click here, and I got about 12 files here. The last year's recording are just for reference. That's why I am making a new video here, particularly gears towards the Mount-Sac setup I did in the summertime. So you can have a matched, better experience of learning the Windows Snort. This is for installing the Snort window box at home using a VMware player, which is a free software you can do if you're so interested to do that. The UDB flat, we're not going to download it today, so I put it behind here. And then this local rule, I'd like you to also install that. Not install it, but copy it over. We'll do that later in the lab. So in here, I reorganize it in a folder format, so it's easier for you to download. All you have to do is just click. If you keep clicking it, click that, and it will go download. And then you can click another one, then it's going to download. So you're going to click all of them for it to download it all. Okay, we downloaded total of 10 files, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, including the local.rules. And we are going to look at the document for the instruction here. At window 10, we're going, which we already did, roll back the image to restore it to the original snapshot. And at window 219, make sure the outside disabled, we did it as well. And Meta E, we can ping all these boxes. It doesn't matter which box you choose to ping the other 3. As long as you choose one of them can do that, that means all those 4 boxes are working fine. Since we are on window 10, I'm going to go to window 10 and ping the Meta E, and ping the 2019 and ping the Cali to make sure everything is communicating. After that's been done, tested, now to save time, I'm going to just use the downloaded file for the rest of this lab to install the Snort. If you wanted to download your own file, create your account as Snort and join the Snort community and download a new signature, please feel free to do so and follow the steps in here. So first thing is we are going to test it out. We don't need to go back to the canvas again, so let me just reduce that. And we can go to the command prompt and make sure we can ping 10.0.1.2, the Meta E, good. And make sure we can ping Cali, which is outside. So we're going to ping 10.10.10.44, that's the Cali, good. And now we need to ping our other window box. So we're going to ping 10, which is inside, 219, window 219, good. So all 4 boxes can talk to each other. That's all we need to do. So let me just reduce that. And now I'm ready to install the software. And first one, of course, is going to do, we're going to do the installer for the Snort, which is this one. So double click on that and say, I agree. And next, by default, it's installed into C drive Snort, which is okay. We'll just take the default. Next. So the Snort for window installation is pretty straightforward. You just click that installer, and that's it. And after the window installer, we are going to install the Wireshark. Okay, so you're going to go to WinPCAP first. So there's a WinPCAP 413, and I'm going to run it. Yes, and I agree. So that's the captured file. And then we're going to install first the Wireshark. and run it. Next. And you agree to the contract. And make sure that you check the Wireshark on the desktop, so it's easier for you to run it, to find it. And default location of the program files, which is fine. Next. And whatever default there, we don't have to change anything up to this point. Okay, agree. Install. You don't have to change any default. And after that, we are going to install this Notepad++. While it's installing Notepad++ is the one that it's very helpful, that it has line numbers for a text file. If it's like snort.config file, it has a couple hundred lines. It would be nice to have a line number. So when the Snort compile, or not compile, but refer to the configuration file parameter to run, if there's something wrong, it will give you the line number that the item is missing or is not correct. It's easier for you to use the Notepad++ to open the snort.conf file to locate the line and then fix it. So that's good troubleshooting tools in that sense. And also, we're going to install the 7-zip, which I like it, or you can use any unzip program to unzip the file. And after that, we are going to save time again to actually download the .tar.gz. That's actually a compressed file for the new snapshot from the snort.org that they put out there. As long as you join the to the community, you can actually download it and install it, and that's what we're going to do. Okay, go next, and let's finish it. Right. After the Wireshark, we're going to do Notepad, MPP, right? Notepad+. Just the default. May as well create a desktop shortcut, right? Finish it off. So it's all at our fingertip. We use it. We don't need to do an update because it's going to be reset it anyways. And after that, we need to install the 7-zip, which is here. Double click, install. That's it. So after we install the 7-zip, we're ready to unzip the compressed file, the zip file of the Snort rule, the new rule. Before we go in there, let's take a look at the Snort. After we install it, the Snort folder has been created, and it has a bin file, which is the binary file. The Snort. If you go in there, the Snort executable file is in here, and there's a document, and there's etc. etc has the config file, the snort.conf in here, and there is also a rule file here. And well, we got no rule here, so it doesn't do you any good that you have intrusion detection deployed with no rule. So we need to actually download the latest rule and then copy it over to here. So let's go back to the download and use this. Oh, can actually look at more programs. You can find a 7-zip, or let's do this. So instead of double click, you can right click, and then the 7-zip is available. And you're going to do, say, extract here. It's going to be extracted twice. Once extracted to the tar, and then we're going to extract it here again. All right, so you'll be able to see that we have rule files and everything in there. As the document suggested, we are going to copy the rule files over and copy etc and overwrite all the rules there. So you can go to the rule here, and then okay, then you're going to go to the home here, and then select all. So this is the rule folder, and then right click, we're going to say copy, and then we're going to, we can open another one, another Explorer, and we're going to go to C drive, Snort, and go to the etc, oops, go to the rule folder, and right click, and we're going to paste. So then we got all those rules in here, and there's also ICMP info rule, got copied over. And right clicked, and edit with Notepad++. And you can see that it has the comment of what this one is for, but there's no rule set. There's no detail rules. So we're going to, again, copy the rules over here later. So we'll just reduce it for now. Move this to the side. And now we already moved the rule. We are going to move the etc over. Whatever's in the etc, we can select it all. Copy, and come in here. And go to Snort, etc, and we're going to paste, and then replace the file, replace the file then. Okay, I'll go back. Now, the only one that we are going to skip is the, let me bring the document back here. So, we're going to skip the SO rules. Okay, so, and then after that, we're going to also, we already downloaded from Canvas those two files. So what we're going to do is we're going to update the ICMP info rule, and also we're going to take a look at the snort.config file. And there are 3 files here. We're going to copy it to override it. Okay, so that is done. So once we have done that, we take a look at the download that we have in here. We have an ICMP info rule in here, right clicked. And you can also take a look at it with the Notepad++. And it has all the rules set in here. It has the ICMP for the IPv6, v4, for mobile device, for the Linux, for the Unix box, different type of Unix box, and then also for Windows box. So we can highlight the whole thing and copy it over, or just simply overwrite it with a new file. So I think it's easier for me just right click and copy. And let's go to Snort, and let's go to the etc. No, go to the rule directly and right click and say paste. and we are going to replace the file. Okay. So once that's done, let's take a. We are ready to test the Snort out. So we got the Snort, the config, we got everything already. We're ready to test it out. Now we can run a command snort-w at C drive snort bin file folder to find out which interface that's the Snort associate itself with. So we have to give that as a parameter to run the Snort. So the syntax is Snort space dash I interface, which whatever interface the Snort found, and use the config file, which is located at C drive snort etc and the snort.conf. Dash capital T means running in a test mode. All right. So we're going to test it out. Of course, you first have to go to /snort, otherwise it won't work. Go to the bin folder. So then we're in here, and if you do a dir, you see that there's a snort.exe file here, right? So the syntax will be snort, if you can take a look at it in the document. It's snort space dash capital W, all right? And you can see this is the same as the screenshot I have on the document that tells you that, hey, number one is your interface number. So what we will do is this time we'll say, hey, the interface actually is number one now. So one, and then dash C is in right backslash snort backslash etc backslash snort.config file. So you hit enter, then it's going to, see that it has a fatal error. And it tells you that at line 243, there are some errors there. So that brings up a troubleshooting place for us to look for. So let's reduce it. And we need to take a look at that snort.config file. So we come here and we take a look at snort, snort.conf. Right here, right click, and then we can open with Notepad++. Once we open it, and you can see there are none line numbers. So drag it all the way down to 243, right? And you can see 243 here. Yeah, the dynamic processor here. This one is not there. Okay, so then we start to troubleshoot the reason why, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now there are so many differences in there. So let's compare the snort.config file that's been downloaded from the Snort website and the one that I fixed and updated. So you are going to compare those two, all right? Okay, so we are going to install WinMerge to compare those two files. So go back to our download folder. There's a WinMerge. Default is fine. And we don't have to create a start menu folder. Shortcut will be nice and handy. All right, on the file, open, we'll have the choices. Now, first, we're going to choose the Snort config when we download it. So we'll go to the download folder and look at the Snort account, the one that I modified it already. And then we're going to take a look at the one that is on the C drive, Snort, and Etsy, Snort config here. And that's the one that you downloaded from the website of Snort. So compare the one that's working and compare the one from the community that you downloaded. And you see that they actually compare it line by line. So it's very easy for you to spot the differences, and you can see that, all right, you started to have some different syntax in there. And you take a look at the rule path. See that the rule path here, that's defined as a variable. If you want to use the variable, you put a $sign in front of the keyword rule underscore path, all capitalized. Then that variable will be replaced with the keyword of C:\\snort rules. So then in here, it's just / rule, and that's the generic form. You have to modify it to the actual location of your rule. And so with the pound sign in the front, it doesn't really matter. And we skip the SO rule. And also you can see that in the Windows, we use the \, and in the Linux, we use the /. So there are many, many differences. If you go back to the end, that's even more. You can see that you have to change all the / to the / for it to work. So you can use this program to spot and compare what's working, what's not working. And I'm not going to go through all the change again. It's going to take quite some time to make all the changes. So I'm going to just copy and overwrite it with the snort.config file I have. So let's reduce it. Now we're going back to the download folder, and we have the snort.conf. Click, and we say we want to copy it. And let's just go there. Go to the C drive, Snort, etc. And let's paste it over. Replace it. So once we replace it, we can run it again. Just go up arrow key once, run the test again. Right. So you can see that, well, we got the successfully validated all the configuration. So that means our Snort is ready to be executed. So now let's take a look at the document again. We already run the test, and we got an error, and we compare it with the WinMerge program, and then we update it with the snort.config file that's already been modified. And the line number is slightly off if you go take a look at the detail in WinMerge, a few lines difference. All right, so the WinMerge screenshot is there. So we go all the way, we went all the way to step number 21. We have gotten the successful validated message here. Now the snort log should be empty now. So we're gonna take a look at the snort log before we started to run the snort and see which logging will happen with what kind of parameters that we issue the command for to activate snort. So one of them, we are going to go to C drive, and we're going to the snort, and this is snort log here in the log folder, and there's nothing in there. So, which is true that we don't have anything in there. Now we are going, but we already updated the ICMP rule. So what we will do is we're going to type in snort, or just up arrow key once, and then change the parameters of that to actually with nothing in there, just a snort dash I space 1 space dash C space then the location of the config file. Don't forget there's a space in between here. Okay, and you run it, and it's really there. And you can see that the alert.ids already been created. All right. And also the snort, as the document mentioned, the snort here, there are 2 files that created. The packet lock, we lock the packet in here. So this one you're going to use Wireshark to open it. And then the IDS is just a text-based lock. So yeah, in here, use the Notepad++ to open this lock. So we can take a look at this one, and I clicked, and we can take a look at it with Notepad++, and there's nothing there. Okay. So let's reduce it again. Right. Now we're going to generate some information by generate some lock by going to MetaE then, and we can actually ping it. Hit enter 3 times, and we're going to ping 10.01.210. That's our continuously for 4 times, so we don't have too many of those ping going on. And in your Snort sensor, you don't see it here, and let's see, you can see that your log file already grow to 1K. Right clicked, and we can actually let's see. We're going to open with Wireshark. And we can go down, find the application on the program files to open this Wireshark, or you can just open Wireshark to open this file. Either way is fine. In here. And remind me later. Okay, so you can see that the MetaE ping it, and it's the lock already there. Okay, and let's exit it out of here. And you can see we're going to edit it with Notepad++ again. And you can see that there isn't anything got locked. Oh yeah, it's finally got it show up in here after it. Okay, this is a text-based lock. It's from the 10.0.1.2. It's a reply ICMP echo reply in here, and then there's an ICMP ping coming from MetaE. So that shows you the ICMP communication, just like the Wireshark. Okay, they lock in. One is the text-based, the other one's lock the packet. And if we install the database, then you can use the database program to take a look at it. Installing the database program is a tedious work too in here. So we are going to use the Security Onion, which already have the built-in database management software that it can actually help us analyze the traffic that's been captured for analysis for the vulnerability assessment. So we actually completed this part of the exercise. Not having any parameters, it's going to log into here, into the C drive Snort lock, because by default in our Snort config file, we actually tell them to lock it this way. So this one shows the packet lock, this one shows the text-based lock. Now we're going to Control C or Control break to terminate the Snort. And we're going to delete all the file in there. And then now we're going to use a -A, capital A, and console. So we will log it to the console to see the different logging mechanism of Snort in the window box. So in here, we're going to do a Control C. It worked, so it's done. And we are going to go here, and we can delete it. So it's gone. And now we're going to go up here, dash A console. Right, now this time we are going to come here, take a look at the login file, press an F5 in here, and you can see that there's only log that has been created. The alert.ids text-based has been pushed out to the console here. So if we, this time we use the Windows Kali here, we use the terminal, and 10.10.10.210. That's a translated address of the sensor, and we ping it 4 times. And you can take a look at it, and you can see that, all right, now we have if you log in here, the ICMP coming in from the trigger was, let me just open it bigger. So the trigger is from 10.10.10.44 to 210, and then from 10.0.1.2.10, and we reply to it. So you will trigger with the different signature, either the 366, 84, and all those signature has been triggered on the ICMP. Right. And again, we take a look at that and refresh with an F5. There isn't any text-based log. It's in the console here. Clicked, and then or the other way, you can do this. You can actually open with, and then go find the program file, Wireshark. That could be a little bit more tedious. And so we can actually put this on the side and reduce this one. And we can go. Okay. We can actually go Wireshark here, double clicked. And then we can file and open. And we can actually go to the log file. It's in here. So we're going to open it, and it's telling you the latest date of that. And sure enough, it's from the Kali 44 ping to the 210, and echo request and a reply a few times in here, 4 times actually. All right, so that completes this part of the exercise with the -A console. Then we're going to delete it all, of course. Just telling you that the log file has been created. The alert.ids will not be created because the text will be shown on the console. So this is the note for that. And now we are going to actually tell them where to log it, and it will produce the same result as if the one without the parameter, like the first one we did. So this part I'm going to skip and delete all the files in the C drive Snort log, and continue on to create the batch file in the Windows system, just like what we did in the Linux Snort, so that you don't have to type it in all the time. It's a pretty straightforward process, just like the Linux-based system. And then we will be able to ping it when we use the -A option. We are going to be able to see it on the console. Okay, so that's what we'll do. So we're going to delete it, probably because of this file that's been opened. So we have to. I think it's been opened in the Snort, so we have to get rid of. We have the Control C here, or Control break. If it doesn't work, try either one or this. It will work. Okay, it's working. So now if we break it out, then we can actually delete it again. now it's gone because this file has been used by Snort, so we cannot delete it. Right now, we are going to do. We're going to go create a file. Before we do that, in the view and under, just make it bigger. In the option here, we are going to make sure that under the view, we are not going to hide the extension for the non-file type. So uncheck the second one and apply to the folders and say yes on that. Okay. Now after that, we're going to, it's under C drive, Windows System 32 that we're going to create a file because that is the executable search path. So once you put it there, you can run the program anytime, similar to what we did in the Linux box. We can actually we'll just do a text document for now. And now you see the .txt in here, because if you don't uncheck the view, say hide the non-file type, it's not going to show up. So then your file may become mysnort.bat.txt. Okay, so just make sure you did that step. We'll make it mysnort.bat. And if I change the file type, of course, it's not going to be the same. Yeah. Then we're going to edit, and we're going to put in snort -i, oops, 1 space -c space C drive snort C count capital A console. And then we're going to just save it. So for this particular program, we can just go ahead and double click. It should run it. Snort. And we're waiting here. Then you can go to your C drive again. There's a System 32 download. Go here. So we're going to go to the C drive Snort in here. So take a look at the log again in here. And you can see because of -a, the console will do all the text-based logging, and we have created another file for the packet log, just like what we did before. It's exactly the same. So this time we use the window box to ping the host. So if we ping the Snort host to 10. Now in your window 10, you're going to see that, oh, okay, now you have triggered different thing. That it's this time it's 382. It's actually ICMP from Windows. And if you take a look at it, and you will see that from 219, of course, go to 210, and ICMP trigger is ICMP ping, and then it's a 382 ping Windows. So depends on different signatures that they have. The reason why they know is that Windows was a specific 382. If you want to investigate, go in a little bit more detail on that. In the Wireshark, what we can do is we can open it, the Wireshark, and then you can say file, and I want it to open, and let this box open it up. And you can see this is ICMP ping, and The reason why they know it's a window is because of the payload. And you can see in the ICMP at the ending, it says A, B, C, D, E, F, G, it's padding it. It padded to meet the minimum requirement of 60 bytes, the total of 60 bytes. And it goes to all the way to STUVW, okay? After W, XYZ is missing. It's starting to go with wrap around with A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. So this is the signature for the window. That's why um, it matched a specific rule of 382 for the window specific ICMP. Okay, so that's part of the detail that I think it's was mentioning. Why is it trigger different ICMP IDS rule if, even if it's the same ICMP, because Linux window, it will have different way of padding it or constructing the packet. So you will have different SID, the signature ID. So next step is that we are going to see we have one of those Snort terminal running, and we're going to run the PowerShell to open another window and run PowerShell, just like in the Linux. We're going to take a look at, we don't use this command shell. We're going to add a window and then just type in power, and you will see window PowerShell. Go to the PowerShell, and then we're going to key in the PowerShell command. The same PowerShell command goes like this: get dash content, C drive, snort, log, and alert.ids dash waited. And now once you do that, you hit enter, and it will give you an error message. It tells you that it cannot find it. Because it doesn't exist. Okay, in here. So we have a problem with that because the file is not even there. So we have to fix it by changing our in here. The document tells you that we're going to change it. We're going to actually take the -A off of our because the file will not be created if we have a -A to log to the console. So there's no text log for you to read from the PowerShell, right? So that's going to be a quick fix. We can Control C or Control break. Either one of them should work. On here, I say yes to terminate the batch because it's now a batch job. Right. In the location of C drive, Windows System 32, where we put our mysnort.bat, go ahead and right click and say edit. And now we're going to just take this off. And then just exit it out and save that. Now this time, if we come here and just say mysnort, yes, you can put mysnort any place now. It doesn't have to be under the C drive snort band because it's calling the batch job. So now when you run that, this time in the PowerShell, it doesn't have any error anymore. Now we're going to generate some information there. So we go to window box again. Window 2019, up arrow key. So we're going to see in the window 10 in your PowerShell, and you can see, oh, okay, that's the 384, 382 window ICMP got triggered again. Now we go to maybe E, or we can go to Kali. Let's go to Kali then, and just up arrow key one more time. And of course, you're going to see the fresh ICMP different trigger number coming up for 948. They probably use the same index, the signature on that. Right. So, but of course, not the 382 window one. That's not definitely not going to show because that's for the window box. All right. So in here, let's take a look at it. And if we go back to look at the Snort log in C drive Snort log folder, you can see that this is the old log that we didn't delete. It's created when we last ran it with the -A console login option here. And then once we modify the file without taking the -A console logging off, the IDS been created. And this IDS, the content is shown dynamically in here. And the login, the packet login still happening here. All right. So it tells you to go back to observe that, and this one and the packet log already got created, recreated there. And the PowerShell also dynamically show that, just like a Linux Snort exercise that we have done. This is the end of our Windows Snort exercise. Okay.